Hey, this is Jay Watts from Merely Human Ministries, and this is Human Things Season 4, Episode 4.
3, 2, 1.
Here we go!
All right. Welcome to the show. This is Jay Watts from Merely Human Ministries. This is the Human Things Podcast. This is my Ultraman t-shirt. If you were looking on YouTube, very happy with this. Almost everything that you will see, pop cultural reference of anything like that on this show, is chosen because it's meaningful to me. It's given to me by people because it's meaningful. But this is an Ultraman. When I was a wee one, a tiny young man sitting in front of the television, watching with the weird hours that we had. For those of you who've grown up in this age, you don't understand how the world used to work. There was only 3 broadcast stations, and then you had the UHF. So we had 2 different. We had UHF, which was a different frequency, and then you had was it VHF? VHF was so ABC, CBS, NBC. That was it. There was no Fox. That was all VHF. And then UHF were the different frequency. They tended to be local or weirder channels. So things like Ultraman, that was a show that was the Americanized version dubbed over with an American plot of a Japanese show that came on in very specific windows that they had for children. So you either had to wake up early before you went to school, or it was on right when you got home from school. I think Ultraman was probably on channel 36. If I remember correctly, there was like 30 was PBS, and then 36 was a channel that we had here locally, and you could watch Ultraman, or 36 and 46 were the 2 where we got to watch. Later, 69 joined in, but they weren't around at that point. And so we would get to watch at very specific times. And I had Ultraman was one of them. Spectraman, I'm hunting down a Spectraman t-shirt. I cannot find a t-shirt I can't remember the name of the show. Space Giants was what they called it. I don't know if you remember Space Giants, but it was Goldar, Silvar, and Gam were the main characters. And Goldar was this massive gold giant with antennas, like robot, and his chest would open up and it would shoot rockets out of it. And then Silvar was his wife, who was human size, which I don't understand. And then Gam was another robot, I guess somehow or another child, but he was a child-sized robot, which again doesn't make sense, because if you can make a giant gold robot, or at least a full-grown human-sized robot, why not manufacture an adult-sized robot? But they would turn into rockets. That was the coolest part of them. There was this cool, they would go, and they turn into rockets. Pre-Transformers. These were Transformers before there were Transformers. Although the transformations made no sense. It wasn't like a Transformer where they kind of look like something and then they turn into it, but you can still see the components of the car or the truck or the plane or whatever. This was a kid with a helmet with antenna, and then all of a sudden he would turn into a jet or a rocket and go flying off. But all that to say, I'm constantly hunting down things that are important to me. And if you look over on the shelf here, we've been joined by Jack. You can't see. Jack's right there, but there's Syndrome, and Jack's on his back, and Mr. Incredible right there. Gifts for my son for the show. I don't think he's given me the pops. I think he's just allowing me to display them on the show. But Incredibles is one of my favorite movies, one of my favorite Pixar movies. Big fan of Brad Bird, the director. As far as his movies go, I don't know anything about him as a human being, but big fan of The Incredibles, of Ratatouille. I even love Tomorrowland. I know it's with George Clooney. I don't get the backlash against that movie. That is a solid movie. That is a solid watch. And I know people got really worked up, I think, when it first came out, because the global warming thing was so politically charged at that time. And there is a point where Hugh Laurie's character is ranting about things, and that comes into it. But the politics of Hollywood is just different than the politics. I mean, it's fine. If they have one line in it that's supposed to be bothering me, it's really not that big of a deal. The movie was solid. It was a solid movie. It's a solid watch. I may go watch it again sometime in the next week or so. But the list of 2 watches is too long. Okay, so I've got some exciting news for all of us. If you've been following this show from the very beginning, you know that we are animal lovers on this show and that we report the reality of the animal kingdom. That to me is the definition of an animal lover. I don't Disneyfy animals. I don't make them into something that they're not. I find them fascinating as they are. And on that note, and I will make sure that the producers have this so they can put up a picture of this or something to go with this when we actually edit it. But bottlenose dolphins spotted killing a dolphin juvenile, the BBC reports. I listen and watch the BBC is my favorite news organization as far as getting information about the world around me. I don't like getting information from American news organizations, largely because they're too obsessed with American politics. And there's only so much relevant information that you can get. I think that everybody has to remember a 24-hour news cycle is unhealthy. It's unhealthy for everyone because you don't need to constantly be marinated in the minutia of what's going on around you. And from a distance, I mean, you should be concerned with what's going on with the person in the room with you. We've had whole shows dedicated to this. And so you want to be present in the lives of the human beings around you and not be obsessed with what's going on politically, geopolitically, or in all of the things that are happening, or because you can't do anything about it. As we quote Neil Postman a lot on this show from Amusing Ourselves to Death, where he says there's unactionable information. You can't stop global warming. You can't stop Putin from invading Ukraine. You cannot impact what's going on between Israel and Gaza right now. You cannot effectively change these massive things that are happening in the world around you. So you should minimize how much they're emotionally controlling you and focus on the lives of the people around you and celebrate with them their small celebrations, the things that may seem meaningless in the greater scheme of things, but are vitally important. To that point, I'll say, and this is the kind of thing I'm talking about. My daughter is getting ready to play in lacrosse playoffs here. By the time this comes out, she probably may have already played her first playoff game. One of the playoff games is a very long drive. And she said, I don't expect you to make the drive to come watch that game because we're expected to win by a lot. So it's not going to be a great game, but it's going to be a long way away. And I said, well, I'm making the drive. And she said, why? It's not going to be a good game. I said, because I am aware that every single game you play could be your last game. I went through this with her older brother, who I was coaching in the fall, who was playing in a fall league with a high school. He got a sprained wrist, left practice one day, missed the last game of the fall season. COVID hit. He never played lacrosse again. I had no idea the last time I watched him play lacrosse that I was watching his last lacrosse game. I had no idea that day at practice I was watching the last lacrosse practice he would ever have. He ended up playing football his senior year after the COVID was over, or at least it was over in Georgia, which we officially announced it being over very quickly. We got done with COVID fast. And so he went on and played football because that seemed interesting to him and because the opportunities for him to play lacrosse in high school as a homeschooler were limited. And so it was like, I never knew. Same thing happened with my daughter, MJ. MJ had a terrible shoulder injury. I didn't know the day that she got that injury that she had a terrible shoulder injury that would take 2 years and 2 surgeries to fix. So the last time I watched her play, I didn't get to just enjoy watching her play a sport that she loved, realizing that she would never play it again. I was frustrated with all sorts of stupid things going on that day. So I told my third, I'm coming to watch, even if it's a terrible game, because I've learned the hard way. Every single time I watch you enjoy yourself playing the sport you love, it may be the last. And so I just want to watch you and watch you have fun and try. I don't care as much about the wins and losses as I do. I just want to see you love playing this sport. And everything in life should be like that. We should be locked in with the people in front of us. All of this started, by the way, because I said that I watch and read BBC more than others because they're not as obsessed with American politics, with American life. I didn't lose sight of that. I know we went off on a rabbit trail. I know that, but it was because, way off. But it was because BBC isn't obsessed with America that you don't get caught up in the news. They'll talk about what's going on in American politics because it's certainly important to the world, but then they move on to other things that are going on and other things of interest. So BBC reports bottlenose dolphin spotted killing dolphin juvenile. I've talked about this for years in presentations, that dolphins are wild animals and they will kill other dolphins. And they look like they're smiling when they do it, which makes it all even creepier. What's funny, it's not funny. It's a little funny. What's a little funny to me about the reporting of this story is that where this happened was in front of a dolphin cruise. So you take those night cruises to go watch the dolphins play, and you hope that they come up. And I've been on a couple of them. One of them I was on, and we got to see dolphins a little close-ish. It really wasn't worth the money. Another one I was on, the dolphins were jumping all around the boat we were on, and it was really exciting. So you want to go see the dolphins. And dolphins are, by the way, very intelligent, very emotional animals. They're beautiful, but they're also wild animals, and they're unpredictable, and they do kill other dolphins. And on this particular case, a juvenile dolphin of a different dolphin variety was beaten to death by a bunch of bottlenose dolphins in front of a bunch of families on a dolphin cruise. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. It must have been so awful. They were scarred and traumatized by taking their kids on a dolphin cruise, and then the dolphins murder another dolphin in front of them. I take back the word murder. I think murder is a moral term that only applies to what human beings do. But they kill. And so it was a life lesson. It was a life lesson. Dolphins are wild animals. They are not Disney creatures. They are not sitting around thinking about the things that we would think they were if we were watching Finding Nemo or something else like that. No, they're wild animals, and they do wild, unpredictable things, including kill other animals, including kill other dolphins. And in this particular case, they were killing this dolphin and then tossing its corpse up out of the water in front of this dolphin cruise, which was a hard lesson, a hard lesson for the families that were there that day. Animals are wild. They're beautiful. Sometimes they're cute, but they are wild animals, and they are not like us. We're brutal and awful too, but at least they'll get into the question of I believe in the existence of objective moral values and objective moral standards. So I would never look at what just happened with those dolphins and say those dolphins were murderers, nor would I want us to in any way try to control the behavior of dolphins to get them more in line with a moral code, because it just doesn't apply to them. The term murder doesn't apply to them. Murder is a moral judgment on an act of killing. Just like in the human world, homicide just means you died because you were killed by another human being. It could be justifiable. It could be murder. It could be all sorts of things. But it's just by broader definition, homicide. But when we call it murder, we're applying a greater moral understanding or moral reference to the act itself. And so animals kill, but they're not murderers. And in this particular case, we have a whole bunch of people on a boat that are going to have to get over being scarred by watching a bunch of bottlenose dolphins kill a smaller dolphin and then tossing his corpse around in front of them like it was a show. All right, so let's move on for that. On a more serious note, one that I find, two things I want to talk about that I find interesting. Number one, the first on that is the death of Pope Francis. Why I found, beyond just the idea that the Pope is a monstrous figure in world politics and world faith, the Catholic Church is the largest denomination of Christians on the earth. The Pope is the leader of that. Also because Pope Francis was oftentimes, for conservatives, a rather controversial pope. Coming on the heels of John Paul II, who was a very conservative pope, and then Benedict, who was an even more conservative pope, who retired, didn't die in office, but retired, which is odd for a pope. And then Pope Francis comes along, and one of the most famous moments in Pope Francis is early on in his term of service here. He was asked about homosexuals within the Catholic Church, and he talked about particularly also in reference to homosexual leadership in the church, people who have leadership positions, priests. If there's somebody who is wrestling with these attractions or whatever, with God, has gone to God with them and is dealing with them through that path, he said, "Who am I to judge?" And that was a moment, an earth-shattering moment in his papacy, because it drew a line between him and the previous popes who were more conservative on this particular issue. He was not, I would say this, I think he, in a lot of ways, this is going to sound offensive, and I don't mean it to. In a lot of ways, Pope Francis was similar to Donald Trump in the way that he used rhetoric. He was not cautious about what he said. So there was oftentimes Pope Francis would speak from his heart without thinking about the theological implications of what he said, and then later would have to explain things further about what he meant about those things. But he did believe very strongly in the idea of not just love your neighbor as yourself, but we are Christians. Our identity with Christians is defined as how we treat people in the moment that they're in front of us. And very famous for when talking about the Catholic Church. And again, I'm not Catholic, but he would say that the Catholic Church is for everyone. Todo. He would say all the time, it's Argentinian. Todo. For everyone. Everyone is welcome in the Catholic Church. And he sought to expand things in that way. So he was not theologically careful all the time about how he spoke. He would say things off the cuff that got him put in a position where he had to backtrack. From all accounts, he didn't care. He wasn't worried about how people responded to the things that he said because he genuinely believed he was speaking from his heart and from a good place. Now, in honor of his death, I don't want to get into the places where I disagree. I wanted to share one story that I heard about him that I found absolutely remarkable as far as a good quality. Catholics who were trapped in Gaza during the Catholic population that lived there, ministering to the people in there as best that they can in that environment, trapped in Gaza during the war in a Catholic church where they had held up and hopefully be protected as they were dealing with everything that was going on there. He was not only aware of their presence there, but I heard an interview with one of them where he called them every night. The Pope called this group every single night to check on them and make sure that they were okay. And that guy talked about what it meant to have the Pope call you every day, to know the names of all of the people that were there, and to check on them to make sure that they were okay, to encourage them to stay strong, not just in their faith, but in taking care of one another. That to me speaks of something. Power is a corrupting thing, and people, can get carried away with being powerful. It can be a separator from you and everybody else. The more power you have, the more difficult it is for you probably to relate to the people around you. You see, and we have evidence of this throughout study of people gaining power and authority and then becoming abusive almost immediately once they have that power. And you can justify it, which is one of the reasons I have on this show. If you've watched or listened to me for a year at all, I have been very concerned about things, all leadership and all of them, every President Trump, President Biden, anybody, when I see signs that they are disregarding the people around them and acting as if they have the right or authority to demand that things have commanding authority, that they are something like a sovereign all of a sudden. And if they want something to be done, it should be done. And they can just make it be done by act of presidential fiat. But anyway, all accounts this was not the way this man was. Now, I don't think he was right about all the things that he was doing. I'm not required to think he was right. I think that he didn't understand, as far as, and I've heard other high up Catholics talk about this, he didn't always seem to understand the concept of papal inerrancy and the idea of his word carried much more weight than it did when he was just a cardinal, right? And he would say things or see and express things in a way that weren't always careful. And there were things that he said that I probably just flat out disagreed with. I mean, but it speaks to me to the kind of person that we're talking about here. There were things there that maybe I underestimated when you hear a story like that. That every day, the single most powerful man in the Catholic Church at some point in the day would think about these people trapped in this horrible situation, and he would call them to check on them. And from those people, they talked about that sense or that feeling of being cared about And by all accounts, that's how he lived his life. He wanted to care for people. So I got nothing but respect for that, man. That is just, for lack of a better word, in the vernacular from when I was young, that's just really cool. Okay, so rest in peace, Pope Francis. And whatever theological differences I may have had with them, we need more people that care about other human beings enough to love them and like that in the world. All right, so next I wanted to talk about, let's see if I can find this link. It is having to do with an interesting development in Gaza. I know that I heard interviews of this on BBC. Now, we have never pretended to be authorities on this issue, and we have had long conversations in the past on this show about how difficult it can be to navigate war. We had a whole show where we discussed the idea at length of proportionality and response, because so many people like to say they've killed so many more people in Gaza than were killed on October 7th, but that doesn't matter, because that's not what proportionality and response. Your response has to be proportional to the danger, not proportional to the act. An act of war, much smaller scale, may lead to a great act of war where a lot of people die if the danger represented in that small attack, if there's a greater risk of a continued danger, continued number of people that could be killed, or if there's a track record of thousands of people having been died, proportional to the risk, proportional to the threat. That's what we mean by a proportional response, not proportional to the number of people that died in any particular incident that was used to justify the war or was the cause of the action. So, but I have always said, just as I said earlier on this show, a little humility about who I am in this world matters. And there is not a single person in this world that's sitting around worried about what Jay thinks about that as far as how it will affect the ultimate outcomes of it. But you hope that people, as best you can when they're entering in the war, are operating from a moral foundation. And we hear different things. I mean, we hear a lot of stories about how the Israeli armed forces tell and broadcast into areas that they're going to be coming to that area to give people a chance to leave before they come in. Recently, we've heard a disturbing story about how they attacked a Palestinian medical group that was coming through and then tried to hide it, apparently. Plowed up ditches and buried even the ambulances that they shot upon, and then lied. And then the body cam footage that came out afterwards demonstrated that they lied. They said that they were under attack or that they weren't flashing their lights or whatever. All of it ended up being a lie. And Israel is dealing with this. The Israeli military, somebody's already lost their job. People are being dealt with. So, but this is the kind of thing that happens when you're talking about war. Is terrible. It's a terrible thing. I have here Paul Tillich's The Shaking of the Foundations, which is a series of sermons by German theologian and pastor Paul Tillich. He tends to be on the existentialist side of Christianity. But the first sermon is The Shaking of the Foundations. And in there, he talks about the time when the Bible starts to talk about things in certain metaphors where you're talking about the sky being on fire and the foundations of the earth being shook. And he said it was understood metaphorically until it became real in World War II. Like everything that they talked about, not just in the age of the atomic bomb and the threat of the level and scale of war that can be waged in modern warfare. He said all of those images that we had in the Bible that seemed metaphorical about mountains and foundations being shook and the sky being set on fire, all of it became a reality. It can happen. And not just by the power of God, but we can be capable of doing horrible things to one another. So when you're talking about nations being caught up into war, it's very difficult to be able to navigate good guys and bad guys because war is so terrible and the repercussions of all war are awful. Clearly, the bad guys were the people who attacked innocent Israelis to start this. And then once the war starts, you just hope that the people in charge of it are acting in good faith and goodwill to minimize the deaths of civilians. And that's, of course, a huge part of this. Now, here's the interesting thing to me. I heard this report yesterday, and I've pulled up the article that goes with the report. The name of the article is anti-Hamas protests on the rise in Gaza as the group's iron grip slips. So, people who live in Gaza, who have been afraid of Hamas, and that know, by the way, and they talk about this at great length, to speak out against Hamas in Gaza is to sign your own death warrant, or minimally to be beaten half to death, mostly towards death. And they share stories of that, of people who spoke out, Gazan citizens who said, they're not looking after us. We don't want them in charge. There's nothing that we can do about this now. And they're putting all of us at risk. But what's happened now, by the testimony of the people involved that they talked to and interview, is that after this protracted battle between Israel and Hamas has taken so many losses that they're starting to look weaker to these people within their communities. And now they're feeling more bold about trying to resist them and to push back against them. People who are saying, one gentleman says that I was 11 years old when Hamas came into power. I've lived my life in fear of them. And now for the first time, I see the possibility of a reality without them. And now they're fighting back and resisting them. And this isn't just a small movement. It's a growing movement where they see that this process of battling Israel has weakened them to the point that they have hope that for the first time that they may be able to unshackle their lives from this group of people that have used them and abused them and made them the targets of Israel. They understand very fully what's going on. And in there, they have two different stories that they share of moments of resistance. So one of them is that they try to move into this older man's house to bomb and to attack Israeli soldiers from it, to launch rockets from it, and he resists them. And when they start to fight him and threaten him, all of his neighbors come and they help in resisting him. They say, you're not going into his house. You will only make him and everybody here a victim because you go into his house and use it as a place to launch attacks from. And they take losses. They come under fire from Hamas, but Hamas eventually gives up and leaves. They share another story where the people in this community have told Hamas, we will not allow you to come into the hospitals any longer, into the schools any longer. We will fight you off with everything that we have to prevent you from doing that. We will no longer allow you to make us human shields. And that's made possible because Hamas is weak from having to battle Israel. Now, I don't know the good and bad of things. Only God does. I don't know the evil and good of every man that's involved in this and every woman. I don't know the death tolls. You hear so many different stories about whether or not this many people, and did they change? Is Hamas actively changing 18-year-olds to be 17-year-olds so that they can count as children and death certificates? Are men of fighting age being registered as children? These are all reports I've heard. I don't know the truth or fact of any of them. But I thought this was inspiring to see people who have lived under the subjugation of Hamas their entire lives to suddenly see Hamas is weakened. And now to feel like there's a chance this can be over right here, right now, if we join in resisting them of having a Gaza without Hamas. And that's a story that I heard on BBC, but I got to be fair, I haven't heard it a lot here. And so I just wanted to share that because war is always difficult to, and even when we talk about Russia and Ukraine, we talked about that there's so many variant, what's his name? The mayor of Kiev got in trouble yesterday, Klitschko, for saying that he thinks that in order to get short-term peace and to stop the war, they may have to temporarily give over parts of Ukraine. And he said, and I've talked about this on this show as well, he said, just like Germany for a time had to be divided, just like we gave up parts of Eastern Europe for a time to not be involved in a war that would destroy us all with the Soviet Union, it may be necessary for a short time to give up parts of Ukraine, but we will reunify just like Germany did. We will find liberty just like Eastern Europe did. It will come, but that the priority now must be the cessation of hostilities and the return to a normal life. Now, he got tremendous pushback from the leadership in Ukraine for saying that. But that's out there, right? For people who are just sick of war and want peace, they're saying this is a complicated situation. Even in Ukraine, it's not as cut and dried as everyone in Ukraine thinks that they're going to fight till the death to preserve the whole and unified Ukraine. And there is a division of view there as well. As to some people say, in interest of peace, we may have to give up things we don't want to give up in the short term because we're just not strong enough to completely repel Russia out of our country. And I don't want to see every Ukrainian die. So even in Ukraine, it's not as cut and dried as we're sometimes given to understand it if we watch social media. But within these, you find human stories. And that for me is the most interesting thing. Within these things that we can't understand, we find things that we can. And I think that a bunch of Gazan citizens that sense for the first time in decades that there might genuinely be a life without Hamas to start to gather their own resources of courage and defiance to stand up to these people and say, we will no longer be your human shields. We will no longer do what you want us to do, even if it means you kill us here today. We are resisting you now. Well, I don't care who you are. That's a beautiful thing. All right, so two more things before we end. This last one is to me. I actually wrote, and I wrote a Substack on this as well. I was asked recently. My family was doing a game night, and game nights never go well with my family. We are just too competitive. I am so jealous. When I was growing up growing up, and when my wife and I were younger, we had this family, this Mormon family that we were friends with, and they did game nights all the time. And they would call us up when we were a young married couple at 10 o'clock at night and say, hey, you want to come over? We're playing games. And they'd have their family, their whole family, grandparents there, 3 generations sitting around the table. We'd play card games, dice games, all sorts of things. Man, they were such lovely people. They could play games without my family. No, we're so mean. We just want to win. And when we don't win, we get mad. And it's everybody at the table, everybody, whatever game we try to play. And it doesn't matter how innocent the game is. We are just competitive people. My competitive streak is so unhealthy. I'll give you a small taste of what it means to be internally me. We're going to church on Easter Sunday. And I walk in, and of course, Easter Sunday, it's very crowded. And we sit at our church, and we have one of the places where it's at Johnson Ferry Baptist, we have the gym. And we sit on the track, in the same areas on the track every time we go to church. I parked, my family's there waiting for me. I sent them in to get seats. I walk in, they're standing up at the top of the track looking around. I look all the way down at the end of the track, and because it's Easter now, we're going too deep on the track. And I see seats, enough seats for my family. And I'm like, go. And so we take off, and they finally start moving, following me as I'm trying to. Now, I didn't full out sprint, get out of my way, like shoving people out of the way. But I am walking with a purpose. And man, there's like a family in front of me. And they're going straight for our seats, aren't they? And they get there right in front of me and take our seats. And we end up sitting on the back row. At Easter service for church, I shouldn't care about this at all. And I was mad for about 2 minutes at everybody I was mad at that family for getting there before me. I was mad at my family. Pray for me, please. Pray for myself. That's how competitive I am. It's like, I'm looking at my daughter. I was like, we lost. We lost because you didn't do what you were supposed to do. I dropped you off so that you could fix this problem. And you know, we are not losers. This is ridiculous. Now we're second row losers because of this. And then about 2 minutes later, as I'm singing some praise and worship song, I realize how horrible this is, how much that I care about this at all. And that's bothered me even for a minute. But that is the competitive drive that exists in everyone in my family. So game night with my family is horrible. It's lovely until someone realizes that someone else other than them is going to win. And then it just starts to go down. So it always starts fun and everybody's happy and enjoying, and then someone starts to distance themselves, and however we're playing it, they get better than all the rest of us. And then people start getting angry and accusations of cheating and all this stuff starts to come out early in the game while we're still having fun. It's this game where you're supposed to learn something about the people or know something. So they read a question, and whoever answers the question about me. So let's say I get a card and I read it. And then whoever answers the question correctly first, and I have to determine the answer in my head before I read it. So I look at it, I say, this is the answer, and then whoever gets that first gets the card. So here is the question I wanted to talk about today. What's the best compliment you've ever been given? What was interesting was that I told somebody I actually just wrote a Substack on this. So if any one of my family reads my Substack, you have the answer to this question. Not a single person in that room can answer it. But my future son-in-law, I believe, all of a sudden followed me on Substack immediately. That was great. So I picked up another follower. But he said, I didn't even know you had one. And then like 3 of the younger people in the room said, I didn't even know what Substack was. I've never heard of it. So here's the answer. And I'll relay it to the story that it comes from and then close this little portion out. I was part of a mission trip to a Muslim country. I don't want to share the identity with it because there are still mission trips going on there and they don't like that. So I don't want to alert anybody. So we're going to this Muslim country. And there were Christians, but 93% of the country or something like that is Muslim, and it's a Muslim government, and they don't allow proselytizing for Christianity within their country. And we were there with host, and we were speaking at different places, and we were going to have an event where we spoke at a seminary. And he gave us our topics. And so he said, this is your topic. This smaller, unassuming gentleman says, I want you to talk about the importance of study and accountability for pastors. It's great. I crafted a talk, studied, got prepped, went in. My translator's there with me. My treaty, my thesis was easy, right? It was, if you are not called to a life of study and a life of accountability, then you have not been called to be a pastor. That it's necessary to study, to be a spiritual and intellectual resource for your flock, and it's necessary to be accountable to others to prevent you from believing that you are more important than you are, and to make sure that you don't lose, not just mission creep, but that you don't allow corruption. Power is a corrupting by nature. I've already said that today. I'm very distrustful of power and what it does to other human beings. I'm grateful. I mean this. I was just talking to a very wealthy person the other day, and they said, what's the secret to your happiness? And I said, God has never made me powerful. And that is a secret to my happiness, because power is corrupting. And I have been blessed to be able to serve in ministry without ever being so important. And I love that, because I have the freedom to say and do the things that I want, but I never have that corrupting influence of power and the love of other people where they just adore you. I have seen so many brilliant and great people corrupted by the adoration of audiences because they love it. There's a line, was that Gladiator, like that, you will, what does he tell them? That you will kill them. You will kill for them and they will love you for it. And you may grow to love them for that. As he tells Russell Crowe's character, that Maximus, that's true. You may love them for loving you. You may grow to love. And I see that in people I know, people that I followed, people that I admire, mentors of mine. I have seen people who fall in love with being loved, which makes me appreciate some of the people that are just rock solid human beings that I've met in ministry all the more, that just never got to where that drove them. One of the things I've told anybody and everybody that I can talk to about my former boss and friend, Scott Klusendorf, is that he is one of the best human beings I've ever met. And that may seem, well, obviously he's in ministry and he loves human life. He should be. That's not always the case. But he's genuinely one of the best human beings I've ever met in this world. as good a man as I've ever met. And I trust his humility and his desire to serve God as much as I've ever trusted any other human being I've ever met in my life. And that's saying something, right? And so I feel blessed that I haven't been there. And so I get in front of this audience. I haven't been in a place where I have to worry about that. And I get in front of this audience and I make that case. Study and accountability. Pretty full, maybe like 300 people in this seminary. Translators talking. A few minutes into the talk, it becomes clear to me that my audience is not enjoying my talk. They're starting to get angry as I make the case that a life of study, they clearly are getting squirmy, not enjoying me. Every speaker before me to this point has been greeted with cheering, and they loved them, and they talked about prophecy and prophetic word and prayer, and God has called me to this and to that, and they adored them. I thought this was going to be the friendliest audience I was ever in front of. I got up and started talking about their need to study, and they got mad. I was not prepared for how mad they were going to get when I got to the part about accountability. They were not happy at all. Now, I see this happening, and so I just keep going. Because I believe what I've said, the talk that I've given is true. If you are not called to a life of study and accountability, you're not called to the life of a pastor. Then in order to be a pastor, the shepherd of a flock, the leader, you have to work harder to understand the word, to understand theology, to understand the intersection of those things in the life that everybody lives, to be a resource for the people in your life that God has made you shepherd over. And you're accountable to them for the kind of man that you are or woman that you are in this world. Their correction matters, and you should listen to it when it's offered. And when I got to accountability, they got mad. And I just kept going. And by the time, you know what the loudest applause I got was? When I said, I'm almost done. I said, I'm almost done here. They went, yeah! They all started cheering. Get off the stage. So I got done, and this unassuming gentleman who had given me this task of talking about this came over, patted me on the shoulder, walked up in front of the audience, and in his native language, he said, my friend, Pastor Watts, because he said, when I got there, he said, Pastor Watts said, I'm not a pastor. He said, when you are here, you are a pastor. He said, I believe that's what I will call you. He said, Pastor Watts has just presented an inarguable case for the importance of study and accountability in ministry. If you don't like it, I'm here right now. Argue with me right here, right now in front of here, right now in front of everyone. Let's have it out right here. And he did. And they would shout things at him, this small unassuming man all of a sudden looked like a spiritual giant as he stood in front of this audience and just met every challenge. And they threw challenges at, and then we go to break for lunch, and people still surround him and are asking him questions, and he's still taking all of them on. And then, of course, some people aren't interested in that anymore, and they're over there hanging out with the other speakers. Nobody would talk to me. Nobody would have anything to do with me. They were so mad at me. Even going all the way up to the point where everybody's leaving. They're leaving the conference, and people will not say goodbye to me. We all had to stand as speakers online, and everybody goes by, and they're like, great speaker, thank you, thank you, thank you. And they would get to me, and they just walk right by. They hated me. So finally, when it's all over, I get a chance to talk to that pastor, and I said, I hope that was what you wanted. And he said it was perfect. I said, okay. Pastor, I got to tell you, though, I feel a little set up. I said, were you aware that was what was going to happen? And he said, oh, yes. He said, in this region, in this place, people rise to the level of pastor, and they often become cults of personality. The power of being a pastor in an oppressed community gives them the sense of greatness to themselves. And heresy sets in. And they become something unchristian because they are so obsessed with communication with the Spirit, but that communication is to them. And the special nature of the relationship they have with God is better than everyone else's, that has led them to this place of leadership in this oppressed community. And they alone will stand against the dark forces of their community and have the courage. They believe themselves to be something that they're not. They believe lies are true, and there's no accountability. He said, so when I looked over the people that were coming, and I saw that you talked about abortion in America, he said, I looked at your resume and I said, this guy is strong enough to be hated. That is the greatest compliment I have ever been given by anyone in my entire life. To have somebody look over my resume and say, this man is strong enough to be hated. So I will give him that privilege by allowing him to talk about something that must be talked about, to invite the hatred of his audience, knowing that he will be fine because he doesn't need them to love him. That's the greatest compliment I've ever been given. And I've spoken for years when I talk to people about abortion. What you need in order to talk to this world is not more fire, not anger, not vitriol, not rhetoric to match the rhetoric of the other side. The world doesn't need you to match hate for hate and anger for anger. It needs you to be strong enough to speak out in the grace and mercy of Jesus Christ about the injustice of the world around you for and on behalf of the equal dignity of all human beings, and to be strong enough to be hated. If you tell a liar that they lied, they will hate you. If you tell a thief that they stole, they will hate you. And if with all the grace and mercy you possibly can, you just simply deliver the truth of Christ to the world around us, the world will hate you. But one thing I've learned, and I've talked about this before, I was standing in front of, I had a teacher one time come up to me after I spoke at a high school, and she said, you know what the most remarkable thing that you said to that audience probably was? It wasn't the long argument about the rights of human beings, about what makes a human being and where our value comes from, and the finer points in there. She said, in the middle of that argument, you said, I don't care what any of you think about me, and I don't care if you hate me. She said, I guarantee you that's the hardest part of that talk for them, because that's not the world they live in, because they do care what other people think. And I did have at one point where I spoke, one place where I spoke, I think this was in Indiana, this young woman stood up in a high school and she said, how can you not care if I hate you? How could that not bother you? And my response to it too was twofold. I was like, number one, how miserable would my life be if I did? Like, how awful would it be if I just went home every night and wept because some 16-year-old girl hates me? That would be the weirdest life an adult could possibly have. So, but the other side of that is, you don't hate me. You don't even know me. You hate what I'm saying. So as long as what I'm saying is important enough that it must be said, then I just don't care if your response to hearing it from me is to hate the messenger, because the message is more important to me in any way. The world does not need Jay to be loved, but the world does need the love of Christ. The world doesn't need Jay to be loved and universally praised, but it needs the grace and mercy of Jesus Christ. It doesn't need me to be popular, but it sure does need people to love their neighbors themselves and to be delivered that message even when they're living the most self-centered life imaginable. The world absolutely needs that. So let them hate you as long as what you're delivering is the truth. We need to be strong enough to be hated. And that is the greatest compliment I was ever given, when someone looked at me and said, he is. He's strong enough to be hated. He loves the truth enough to be hated when delivering it. So, we're going to end on that today. That's the end. There was another segment. I'll bump it to next time. It's about maternal deaths and the number of them. We'll cover that in the next show because it's a lot. There's a lot to go into, and I feel like it would change a reasonable show into something much, much, much longer. So let's bump that. The next recording, we're going to talk about the idea, because one of the things I've read is this idea that because of anti-abortion laws being enacted throughout the United States, mortality rates among pregnant women have risen. And that's really interesting. Number one, because it's not clear that that's true. It appears that that's not true. But number two, it speaks to something that I've talked about before. The comfort that people have in making claims without making any effort whatsoever to evaluate whether those claims are true or grounded in evidence. So that will be the next show. But for that, thank you so much for tuning in to Human Things, episode 4 of season 4, 4. And we'll talk to you next time. For more resources, please visit us at merelyhumanministries.org. We are on Instagram at Merely Human Ministries. We are on YouTube. We're all over the place, man. Facebook, find us and reach out. If you have any questions, reach out. Another thing we're going to talk about on the next episode as well, and we're going to produce a bunch of shorts for this. I've been working with Students for Life of America, and I'm going to be going to speak to a group coming up shortly, and they have sent me a list of the most often heard objections from 45 different campuses around the country, and we're going to work our way through some of those objections, some in shorts and then in a broader sense on the show. And this will be posted on our website after I go and speak as a resource both for those people who heard me speak and for anybody else interested in seeing it. Have a great day.